certified public participant professional, supports organizations to make the best decisions possible by ensuring those impacted and interested have an opportunity to contribute, feel valued, heard, and respected. And Tannis has managed over 300 projects aimed at bringing diverse audiences together to build relationships, establish trust, and work together to make decisions. As owner of Top End Limited, Tannis provides facilitation, engagement, coaching, and training to organizations throughout the world. What Tannis is most passionate about, though, is working together to make a difference with individual organizations, communities, and their relationships, making sure that everyone is in a better place than when they started. And Kim Hyshka is a believer that just about anything is possible with a little dialogue. Kim's mission is to chart a different course for public conversations, better conversations that open possibility, cultivate collaboration, and spark change through dialogue. With over 12 years of working in the field of engagement, Kim has developed a passion for designing and facilitating conversations that matter and create engagement experiences where participants feel valued, relationships are built, and initiatives and projects move forward. Kim's client base is both large and small. She brings experience facilitating community forums in large urban centers or walking pipelines with elders in remote wilderness. Over the past number of years, Tannis has worked with clients to provide advice and strategy, developing for high stakes and emotionally charged conversations and situations. And it's a great pleasure to have both of our presenters here this morning. And with that, I'll pass things over to Kim and Tannis. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. Give us one moment while we do a little bit of technology sharing. Tannis, can you give me the head nod that we can see some slides?
We are all good.
Excellent. All right, and welcome everyone. We're very delighted to, Tannis and I are very delighted to be with you here this morning. We're going to spend some time talking about community engagement, and I'm sure many of you are living and breathing this work all of the time, and we know that it's not simple. There is a lot of diversity. There are a lot of differences, and so we wanted to offer some thoughts this morning on, what does that look like, and how do we do it? So let me begin here. I'm going to just close a few things so that hopefully then you can see all of my slides. Just give me a moment. All right. Hang on, everyone. Here we go. All right, here's where we wanted to begin this morning. I've come across this quote recently. Life is moving in the direction of the conversations that we're having. And I think about this, both of the conversations that we're having in our heads, but also those conversations that we're having with others. Now, this quote speaks to me on so many levels, and I invite you to reflect on it a little bit. To me, when I hear this quote, it offers that conversation, dialogue, what we talk about, how we talk about it, it's at the heart of so many things that matter. What we experience during conversation and then the relationships that we build, or actually sometimes harm, have a profound impact on the way that we experience life, the way we experience work, the way that we experience decisions or change. But here's the thing, everyone. Technology is solving so many of our challenges. It's taking advantage of the opportunities that science is putting forward. But when we're talking about change, and change that intertwines hopes and fears and beliefs and needs, especially if any of those things are competing or in conflict with one another, dialogue, discussion is sort of all we've got. So Tannis and I are on a bit of a quest. You heard it read in some of our bios. We're on a bit of a quest to change the course and chart a new course of the way that we're having conversations. Because again, we're seeing this connection between the type of conversations that we're having and what our communities, what our families are experiencing. we really see that relationships are the sweet spot. You know, when we build relationships within our organization, with community members, with families and students and parents, this is where we find that motivation and the trust to make the changes that we want to see. So I'm going to be turning it over to Tannis here in a moment. But again, this morning, we're here talking to you about community engagement and where does diversity, difference, and dialogue all connect. Now, probably many of you already know this, but there is no perfect solution for how do we navigate diversity and difference in our community engagement. But Tannis and I have certainly come across a few pretty clear guideposts. And so we'd like to offer some of those to you this morning. Tannis, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Kim. I think the other thing that's going on around us is the complexity of all the issues that we are dealing with. There is no single solution to some of these challenges that we face in front of us. And because of that, that means that there is no single one person who has the solution for that. And so what is needed is to sit at the table with our differences and to put all of that diversity and difference on the table, not in a polarizing or dividing or disrespectful sort of a way, but in a way in which we can understand so that we don't simplify and jump to easy solutions. Now, the challenge, of course, is with complexity. Often conflict sits with it. And conflict, by its very nature, is value-laden and very emotional. The only way to move through this chaos and deal with the emotion is to come together in a different spirit, in a spirit of dialogue, to understand those differences in worldviews and to identify what are some sustainable solutions. In this space especially over the last year and a half, I have noticed in my clients do one of two things. Either one, they continue to do the same thing that they've always done, only just doing it online. Or number two, they've taken this time as a bit of a pause to sit and reflect and intentionally think about what has worked and what has not been working. And do we need to do something different? And choosing to take action. And the innovation is actually, as Kim had said, the innovation is not in the technology. That's just our tool. The innovation is thinking about the quality of our relationships and the quality of our dialogue and having different experiences in the face of some of these challenges and complexities. Because our techniques are just tools. They can't actually deal with emotion or with conflict. That's up to us. So just wanted to send a couple of definitions just to get us on the same page of what we're talking about. Next slide, Kim. When we talk about engagement, what we talk about, back one.
Sorry,
my engagement. Oh, good. It's about really understanding the needs, the values, the concerns that our communities have and considering that in making our decisions. When we talk about dialogue, next slide, what we mean here is it's very different than debate. In debate, we're looking at one person being right, there being one best solution. Oftentimes there's winners and there's losers. We're seeking for weaknesses or flaws in the other positions. Whereas in dialogue, it's really about coming in together in a spirit of understanding, of deepening our understanding, of being curious about what are those differences, and a mindset of understanding that we each hold a piece of knowledge that's important in order to find the best solutions. So it's not steps. There isn't just a stepwise process to follow in this. It's really about a way of being in relation to people. It's about the skill set, the mindset, and the practice of having constructive conversations and exploring some of those differences. Now, I say this not from a philosophical perspective, but based on my experience. The only way I know how to work through differences is by coming together in this spirit of dialogue. It's a practice. And Kim and I work in this space every day. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I have to make amends. And sometimes I'm still working on it to figure out the best way through this. So this morning, we wanted to wrap our experiences together with you and see what we might discover together. Kim.
All right, everyone. So here's the thing that, is sort of like jumping out for me is that Tannis and I are spending all of this time talking about dialogue and relationships. And then I'm going, oh gosh, we've been talking at you for quite a few minutes right now. And so we'd love for you to do this, everyone. Warm up those fingers in the chat box right now. Maybe just share with us really quickly, like where you're joining from today. Zoom helps us. We can see your name, but we're also really curious when you're thinking about, this discussion that we're having this morning about community engagement. Was there anything you were hoping to walk away with, or, something that you were like, oh, I was really hoping, we might touch on this? And I'm seeing lots of people coming from all across the province, which is fantastic. Keep all of those messages coming in. But did want you just to, start thinking about, as leaders in your organization, you're often leading some of that community engagement. And we want you to start thinking about, what does it look like to work with, diversity and differences. We had a couple of other questions for you as well that we thought we might throw here in the chat so that we could get some conversation here going. And just give me a minute, everyone. My slides are deciding to be a little slow. Here's what we'd love for you to put in the chat for us right now. I want you to think about how many really tough conversations have you had in the last couple of months. These could be conversations you've had at work. These could be conversations that you've had with staff or with students or parents or board members. Just trying to get a sense of how many really tough conversations have you had in the last 2 months. I'd love for you to put that in the chat for us right now. All right, how many tough conversations? Now, again, everyone, some of you might be having heaps of these tough conversations. Some of you might just be having a couple, but wow, did they impact you or impact the people that you were interacting with? And certainly seeing some people saying, I've had a couple. Some people are saying, like, I've had a ton of these. And yes, we can certainly imagine in this crazy time that we're living through, many of us are working through difficult conversations on a lot of different fronts. So thank you, everyone, for sharing in the chat. We got a couple more questions here for you. Again, just kind of warming up here a little bit. Tannis, I know we had a couple other questions. Over to you.
Yep. So when you think about some of these tough conversations and the impact that they have on you and those that you serve, how well would you say that they have been going? How well have you say that they have been going, these tough conversations? One is like, number one, rocking it, doing really great, figuring it out. It's hard, it's tough, but we're getting to the outcomes that we need at the end. Or all the way to 10, just put the number into the chat box, 10 being, well, that was a disaster. I left feeling more exhausted than when I started, more confused, and a little bit apprehensive about coming into the next conversation because of maybe some of the impact on our relationships that we've had.
Excellent. We've got an assortment. Yes, I love it. We've got some people are saying, some of them have gone really, really well. We've got other people who are saying, God, that did not go the way that I was looking. And I just really want to name this, everyone. Just because a conversation didn't go well, it's not actually a reflection of like we did badly. And so certainly don't hear this as a judgment against anyone. This is just a real reflection of sometimes these conversations, dialogues go really well, and sometimes they don't. And there's an incredible opportunity even to step back in when things don't go exactly the way that we're expecting. So I'm going to keep us motoring here because we've got lots of things Tannis and I are hoping to talk about. So next thing that we wanted to offer to you, Tannis and I are really seeing a few things emerging in the space that we're working in, sort of in our current time, in our context. We've got some things that are emerging that we think are really impacting how we're coming together in community engagement. And the first one that I wanted to offer is, gosh, I'm seeing it in so many places. And I'm using the royal we here, everyone. So we, generally speaking, as a larger society, we're really good at talking at one another, and we aren't so good at talking with one another. I was reflecting on this a bit as we were getting ready for this, and I look at so many of our conversing tools, and we're asked to post, we're asked to broadcast, we're asked to react to how other people are putting content or saying things out in the world. And it's so rare that we're asked to reflect, to ruminate, or to respond. And I think that's having a huge impact on how we're coming together. We're living through this time that's very yes, no, black, white, for or against. Like when did it happen that, if you're for something, you have to be against something else? Certainly we see it in our politics, but I think we're also seeing it in lots of other parts of our life. And so I just think that this is really important, especially in our pandemic experience right now, where I think we've all been making choices for our family, for our organizations, and sometimes they're in conflict with one another, and we're struggling to talk through those in really productive ways. Tannis, tell us a few more things that we're really noticing out there.
Yeah, things that are impacting things like our emotional bandwidth. It is shrinking. If you have faced things like confusion or tension or uncertainty or disorientation, sometimes on the daily, sometimes hourly, those are all signs that we are sitting in complexity. And we often have with that a very strong sense of discomfort. And so in that, we want to try to simplify and oversimplify, like I had mentioned, which means then we start to create generalizations and assumptions and judgments in order to seek making sense and to search for that comfort. Now, here's the thing, we're all doing it. We're doing it. Everybody else is doing it out there to try to make sense of our world right now. And that's also what's partially causing some of our source of polarization, of negativity, sometimes of hate. And it's just creating more conflict and more differences. And then we layer on some of the multiple complexities of all the other issues going on around out there with the pandemic, reconciliation, economic uncertainties, racial justice issues, and now we've got this intersectionality of all of these complexities. And in this, when we simplify and start to take sides, we actually lose our ability to engage authentically. Kim.
Another thing I wanted to offer you, and you'll let me know after this session if you're seeing this too. Again, we have so many tools. I'm sure all of us, no, maybe not all of us, but many of us right now could, hold up a device of some kind, whether that's a smartphone or a laptop or a tablet, or we've got these, watches that talk to us now. We have so many ways to communicate. And then the applications that are in these devices, Snapchat, FaceTime, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, like these many different good old phone calls. We have all of these different ways to communicate. And so in theory, it should be so simple to stay connected with our communities, to stay connected with our parents and families and loved ones. And yet, here's the interesting thing, everyone. I was doing some research, doing a little bit of reading before this session, and you can find research study after research study that is suggesting that we're losing connection, that actually we are feeling significantly more lonely than we ever have before. And so isn't this an amazing thing where so much technology, so many tools, and yet wild amounts of loneliness? As a fun fact, everyone, I actually found out that in the UK in 2018, they actually created a ministry of loneliness. They have a strategy that they're working on to start changing some of those social impacts that are happening. I also read that between 1 and 5 North Americans feel lonely. And it's interesting, here's how it connects to community engagement, is that lonely is often defined by not having someone to discuss important issues with. And so I think, again, this trend that we're seeing has a big impact on our work and engagement. Tannis, over to you.
Great. And the last thing I'll highlight, I think that is impacting our context right now is this description of we need to pivot. I actually don't think that is giving us justice to what we actually need to be doing. When I hear the words, we just need to pivot, what I hear is we just need to pretend that there's not quite so much change, that we'll just continue doing what we're doing, but we'll just take it online now. And when you think about physically, the image of pivoting, I think about basketball, right? Where you have one foot that's still grounded in that one moment, in that time, in that old space. And so we're still moving from this place that we used to operate from. And I think so much has changed that, in fact, that does not adequately describe what we might actually need to do, especially if things in the past weren't actually even really working all of that well for us. So Kim, I think the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. And I'd like you to pop into the chat box. If the answer to this statement, if I could change one thing about how I engage with my communities, it would be. How would you finish that statement? If I could change one thing. Because like I said, if things that we have done in the past, we might have just been doing it because we didn't really know how to do things differently. But now things have shaken up so much that we're actually forced to think a little bit more deeply about this. So I don't know if pivot is not the right word. I'm not sure what the right words are, but maybe it's more of a leap and a transform. There was a question about earlier in the chat box that said something about with all of these challenges, how do we do this? How do we increase our own bandwidth? How do we make some of these changes that we would like to see in our practices or engaging with our communities? And so Kim, I think we're ready to dive into some of those, the so what, the next what thinking.
Excellent. All right, everyone. So here's what we want to do. We have a very brief 7 minutes left with you. Tannis and I are just going to offer a couple pieces of, some of the what works and what doesn't. If we're going to dive into this, we're going to move reasonably quickly here as we want to be respectful of the next sessions that are coming up. 3 things that I wanted to share with you about what works when we are aiming to engage in diversity. Facts and feelings are needed. Now, we know that when people are, just think about the last time you were really emotional about something, angry, frustrated, distraught, disappointed. If someone came to you and said, I'm just thinking to myself, Kim, let's just calm down for a minute and let me tell you why you don't need to feel that way. Well, holy smokes, my head might pop off in that moment. And so the thing that we've been learning over and over about engagement, facts, information, super important, incredibly important. And it needs to be included with how are people impacted? How are they feeling? What experience have they had? We need both of those things. We also know in this work that there are times that we can we will not always find agreement. We're not always going to, at the end of a community engagement, go, everyone agrees on everything that we said. But we do think that there is an opportunity to find alignment. So this is where maybe we see the path forward differently. The how might look different, but the why, we may be able to find some alignment on the why. So we invite you in your engagement discussions to think less about, will everyone like it? Will everyone agree with it? But where might we find some alignment? And last but not least, I wanted you to think about, what does it look like, again, in community engagement, to be in charge, but not necessarily be in control of everything? And I'll give you this description. Right now, I'm working with a ministerial task force. And our last set of meetings did not go exactly the way that I was expecting them to go. we had, there was lots of legal maneuvering. We had, we had some really, really tough discussion that was happening in all of it. So while I can't control how all of my stakeholders are going to participate, I can be in charge of the experience that I create. I can be in charge of the questions that I ask. So I invite you to think about, what does it look like in your own work to release being in control so that we can share with our community members, but still be in charge? Tannis, over to you.
Thanks. And I want to leave you with two other things to think about. I think what Kim has talked about are very great tips sort of for designing and in the moment. And I want us to think about some things differently in terms of that space of pivoting. If we were to instead to transform and to leap, what might be some of those big leaps when we think about that might change the relationships, that might change the context that we're working in. And the first one is about power and control. So one of your quality leadership standards is about supporting effective governance, right? So decision making. If we think about how traditionally we make decisions, it's very much organizational led, organization leads. And for sure, certainly in lots of the decisions that you have to make, that is appropriate. But there's actually other ways and other combinations to share power. We have the opportunity where we can have it be community driven, where the community leads and the community acts. In your worlds, an example of this might be parents who lead fundraising efforts in order to build playgrounds. That's an example of a community driven initiative. There's also community advocacy, where the community identifies problems or opportunities or solutions proactively, and the organization then says, yes, we will take the lead on that for you and meet those needs in a proactive way. And then there's also the model of shared responsibility, the space of collaboration, of shared decision-making, of joint responsibility, of joint leading and joint action taking. And so while absolutely there are some decisions that you still must lead and act on, I just wonder if we considered some of these different models of sharing power, that whether this might change our dynamics, our relationships, and shift some of those differences in that diversity, shift the conflict, since we now are thinking about how can we work with community instead of doing things to community. And then the last is around thinking about our community engagement as being relational engagement rather than transactional. When I saw in the chat box some of the things that folks said that they would like to be able to potentially change, it is exactly the focus on relation. Things like being more open and authentic in our connections, things like being more effective with our use of our time, focus on relationship building, taking our time to build some of those relationships. Relational focus is less on transactional focus, is more about operations, about our plans, about our tactics, about going in, coming out. It's very much sort of performance sort of driven. If we think about from engagement from a relational perspective, we focus on those principles that we want to be able to, at the end of the day, say, this is what we achieved, regardless of what the outcome looks like. We built relationships. We deepened our collective understanding. We were authentic. We listened. We demonstrated that we were listening. Those are, when I talked about my clients that I've seen who have either continued to do what they've done or have shifted, it's this that they have shifted. They have shifted their thinking to how can we do some of these, achieve some of these principles and show that we're listening, engage in constructive conversations, and using these guideposts, these principles as our guideposts for making decisions about how we engage with our communities is what has really paid off, because this is what these principles embody, I think, the public's expectations that we can manage. I often hear people say, we just need to manage the public's expectations, but that's almost impossible. I think there's only 3 public's expectations that we can actually manage in our work of engagement. Number 1 is the public's expectation to be heard. Number 2 is the public's expectation to be valued. And number 3 is their expectation that their ideas and their solutions and their concerns be considered and addressed. Those are what we are responsible for when we come together and engage. The planner that I worked with in one organization was very much focused traditionally on, I'm a planner, this is what I do. I go, I do the work, I plan, I get my plans together. Then we go out to the public, we hold an open house and say, ta-da, what do you think? Then we hear all of these concerns and these frustrations about what we have planned. Then we take it away and we can't really do much with it. We make minor tweaks and then we move it on forward. Shifting to this relational versus transactional thinking, we actually turned that whole process on its head, and they started with listening. They started in dialogue, inviting in differences, exploring that, understanding it. And at the end of that process, it's my favorite line ever. He said, I would have these conversations every day. They are so valuable. In fact, I'm going to set aside time for 10 more of these. And this is the mindset and the practice of dialogue. I think that he will never go back to doing another open house the way that he has traditionally done it in the past. And that's the kind of transformation that's making a difference in our worlds right now.
All right, everyone, we have come to the end of our time together. This is what we're hoping we have left you with. A few ideas. What's happening out there? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? So we hope we've left you actually with more questions than answers. The point of this morning was to get you thinking and to use Tannis's line to keep you curious. This work of engagement is complex and it has so many opportunities. So we hope we've piqued just a little bit of curiosity. David, Val, we're going to turn it back over to you. Thank you for listening this morning.
Tannis and Kim, thank you very much for your presentation. We hope people take the opportunity to hear more of what you have to say with specifics around community engagement. You started with a slide that as people have navigated COVID-19, have probably collectively said, go figure. Life is indeed moving in the direction of the conversations we are having. And through good intentions, we can become tangential and fragmented in trying to engage in this work. And I think you illustrated how diversity and difference can be brought to a coherent whole. At least this is what I heard, through exploring ways of getting to shared responsibility, enabling people to be heard, valued, and so that there was consideration of their part in the community in decisions that were made. There was a flurry of responses in the chat box. I liked Alan Davidson's folksy language. We typically want to bring anything we're doing to a good place. And I think your presentation has kind of animated that. And I thank you for your presentation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.